ghosts, ghouls, and things that go bump in the night. I hope you've been enjoying your spooky season so far. I know I've been. But to be perfectly honest, I just can't wait to get back to this week's story. Now, if you weren't able to tune in last week, or if it's been a minute and you don't quite remember what's going on, we have been reading The Water Ghost of Harrowby Hall by John Kendrick Bangs. Last time, we discovered that the ghost was the 5th removed great-grand aunt of the main character, who is now being haunted every Christmas Eve for an hour between midnight and 1 a.m. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the Water Ghost of Harrowby Hall. The story of the visitation inflicted upon his family had gone abroad, and no one could be got to invite him out to any function save afternoon teas and receptions. Fathers of daughters declined to permit him to remain in their houses later than 8 o'clock at night, not knowing but that some emergency might arise in the supernatural world which would require the unexpected appearance of the water ghost, in this on nights other than Christmas Eve, and before the mystic hour when weary churchyards, ignoring the rules which are supposed to govern polite society, begin to yawn. Nor would the maids themselves have aught to do with him, fearing the disruption by the sudden incursion of aqueous femininity in the costumes in which they held most dear. So, the Herr of Harrowby Hall resolved that his ancestors for several generations before him had resolved that something must be done. His first thought was to make one of his servants occupy the haunted rooms at the crucial moment, but in this he failed, because the servants themselves knew the history of that room and rebelled. None of his friends would consent to sacrifice their personal comfort to his, nor was there to be found in all England a man so poor as to be willing to occupy the doomed chamber on Christmas Eve for pay. Then the thought came to the heir to have the fireplace in the room enlarged, so that it might evaporate the ghost at its first appearance. And as he was congratulating himself upon the ingenuity of his plan, then he remembered what his father had told him, how that no fire could withstand the lady's extremely contagious dampness. And then he bethought them of steam pipes. These, he remembered, could lie hundreds of feet deep in water and still retain sufficient heat to drive the water away in vapor. And as a result of this thought, the haunted room was heated by steam to a withering degree, and the heir for 6 months attended daily the Turkish baths, so that when Christmas Eve came round, he could himself withstand the awful temperature of the room. That scheme was only partially successful. The water ghost appeared at the specified time and found the heir of Harrowby prepared, but, hot as the room was, it shortened her visit by no more than 5 minutes in the hour, during which time the nervous system of the young master was well nigh shattered, and the room itself was cracked and warped to an extent which required the outlay of a large sum of money to remedy. And, worse than this, was the last drop of the water ghost was slowly sizzling itself out on the floor. She whispered to her would-be conqueror that his scheme would avail him nothing, for there was still water in great plenty where she came from, and that next year would find her rehabilitated and as exasperingly saturated as ever. It was then that the natural action of the mind and going from one extreme to the other, suggested to the ingenious Herr of Harrowby Hall the means by which the water ghost was ultimately conquered, and happiness once more came within the grasp of the House of Oglethorpe. The heir provided himself with a warm suit of fur underclothing. Donning this with the furry side in, he placed over it a rubber garment, tight-fitting, which he wore just as a woman wears a jersey. On top of this, he placed another set of underclothing, this suit made of wool, and over this was a second rubber garment, just like the first. Upon his head he placed a light and comfortable diving helmet, and so clad, on the following Christmas Eve, he awaited the coming of his tormentor. It was a bitterly cold night that brought to a close this 24th day of December. The air outside was still, but the temperature was well below zero. Within, all was quiet, the servants of Harrowby Hall awaiting with beating hearts the outcome of their master's campaign against his supernatural visitor. The master himself was lying on the bed of the haunted room, clad as has already been indicated, and then the clock clanged out the hour of 12. There was a sudden banging of doors, and a blast of cold air swept through the halls. The door leading into the chamber door flew open, a splash was heard, and the water ghost was seen standing at the side of the heir of Harrowby, from whose outer dress there was steamed rivulets of water, but whose own person, deep down under the various garments he wore, was as dry and as warm as he could have wished. "Ha!" said the young master of Harrowby. "I'm glad to see you."
You are the most original man I've met, if that is true. May I ask, where did you get that hat?
"Certainly, madam," returned the master courteously. "It's a little portable observatory I had made just for such emergencies as this. But, pray tell me, is it true that you were doomed to follow me about for one mortal hour, to stand where I stand, to sit where I sit?"
That is my delectable fate.
"We'll go out on the lake," said the master, starting up.
You can't get rid of me that way. The water won't swallow me up. In fact, it will just add to my present bulk.
"Nevertheless," said the master firmly, "we will go out on the lake."
But, my dear sir, it is fearfully cold out there. You will be frozen hard before you've been out 10 minutes.
"Oh, no, I'll not," replied the master. "I am very warmly dressed. Come!" This last in a tone of command that made the ghost ripple. And out they started. They had not yet gone far before the ghost showed signs of distress.
You walk too slowly. I am nearly frozen. My knees are so stiff now, I can hardly move. I beseech you, accelerate your step.
"I should like to oblige a lady," returned the master courteously, "but my clothes are rather heavy, and 100 yards an hour is about my speed. Indeed, I think we'd better sit down here in this snowdrift and talk matters over."
Do not do so, I beg. Let me move on. I feel myself growing rigid as it is. If we stop here, I shall be frozen stiff.
"That, madam," said the master slowly, and seating himself on an ice cake, "that is why I have brought you here. We have been on this spot just 10 minutes. We have 50 more. Take your time about it, madam, but freeze. That is all I ask of you."
I cannot move my right leg now,
cried the ghost in despair.
and my overskirt is a solid sheet of ice. Oh, good, kind Mr. Oglethorpe, light a fire and let me go free from these icy fetters.
Never, madam, it cannot be. I have you at last.
Alas,
cried the ghost, a tear trickling down her frozen cheek.
help me, I beg. I congeal.
Congeal, madam, congeal, returned the man coldly. You have drenched me in mine for 203 years, madame. Tonight you have had your last drench.
Oh, but I shall thaw out again, and then you will see. Instead of the comfortably tepid, genteel ghost I have been in my past, sir, I shall be iced water,
cried the lady threateningly. No, you won't either, returned Oglethorpe, for when you are frozen quite stiff, I shall send you to a cold storage warehouse, and there you shall remain an icy work of art forevermore.
But warehouses burn.
So they do, but this warehouse cannot burn. It is made of asbestos, and surrounding it are fireproof walls, and within those walls the temperature is now, and shall forever be, 416 degrees below the 0 point, low enough to make an icicle of any flame in this world. Or the next, the master added, with an ill-suppressed chuckle.
For the last time, let me beseech you. I would go on my knees before you were they not already frozen. I beg of you, do not do.
Here even the words froze on the water ghost's lips, and the clock struck 1. There was a momentary tremor throughout the ice-bound form, and the moon, coming out from behind a cloud, shone down on the rigid figure of a beautiful woman sculptured in clear, transparent ice. There stood the ghost of Harrowby Hall, conquered by the cold, a prisoner for all time. The heir of Harrowby had won at last, and today in a large storage house in London stands the frigid form of one who will never again flood the house of Oglethorpe with woe and seawater. As for the heir of Harrowby, his success in coping with a ghost has made him famous, a fame that still lingers about him, though his victory took place some 20 years ago. So ends the water ghost of Harrowby Hall. Well, ghosts, ghouls, and things that go bump in the night, how did you feel about the water ghost? It's definitely the most ingenious way I have ever heard of getting rid of an apparition. Do you have a unique way to get ghosts out of your life? Let me know. You can find me on Facebook at Haunted Horrorstorian, or send me an email at hauntedhorrorstorian@gmail.com. That's all from John Kendrick Bangs. But until next time, my spooky friends, stay spooky, and remember, sometimes it's more than just a story.